Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
A Geek for Fun.
And Steve.
So Alfie's back, yay. We missed Alfie. And he's
Fittingly
picked
in a movie
something...
about colonization.
Yeah.
Exactly. I have to make sure y'all remembered what I'm about.
Alfie's gonna have like the...
Come.
Unironically, the sky people are the heroes.
Exactly.
These fucking trees everywhere? How do you build cities?
Couldn't think you guys thought I got staffed in my absence. You know, I gotta help them. Get them right away.
Yeah, so Alfie picked Avatar Way of Water, which I realize now is pretty funny because we've never done an episode on just Avatar. Even though I've talked about it here and there, because I actually quite like the first one for what it is, but I never got around to watching the second one. Now the fucking third one's out, and even though it's like made $1 billion at the box office, it still might not get the full series that James Cameron wanted it to get, which is just insane to think of. So yeah, Avatar's an interesting cultural beast. Is it cool before we like really get into Way of Water if we just talk about the cultural impact or lack thereof of Avatar?
For sure.
Because like that's the thing, that's the take I've seen a number of times, and I do think it is really hitting on something, that you have these like at least the first two massively financially successful films. The Avatar for a long time was the highest grossing movie of all time, and like he re-released it multiple times after other things beat it so that it could rake up more money and reclaim the place. And yet, like, no one's a fucking fan of Avatar, like, that I've ever just met casually, except for one dude who I worked with for a couple weeks. And he was into that shit. He was all about Avatar. So I don't know, Avatar's just like this weird nebulous thing. I think South Park did like a episode shortly after the first one came out where they're like, oh, it's just Dancing with Wolves but with blue people. And that's kind of like the shit take that's come out. I recently went to Disney World for vacation, or Disneyland, whatever it is, for vacation, and went to the World of Pandora, and that was, cool. We went on a ride. It was pretty neat. Actually, low-key had the best cafeteria-style restaurant food that I had in the whole park, so, keep that in mind if you go. Like, I don't know, it's just this weird cultural beast, and it seems that it can somehow make billions of dollars and yet leave no lasting impact. And, I'm sitting there watching this one, and I'm like, man, some of this shit is, like, so cool and imaginative and just inarguably gorgeous. Why don't people really, like, care? What's going on with that?
The thing about that, though, is I feel like what people seem to fail to recognize is that Avatar comes out in a moment where people engaging with something in the form of fandom had like quintessentially changed. So like you release Avatar in 2009, right around then is the birth of the MCU and the Dark Knight movies, and fandom and things having a cultural impact started becoming synonymous with them having an online footprint, and Avatar just never really had that. And the other thing too that I think goes ignored is that Avatar is huge overseas. Like, it makes a lot of money in the US, but it makes money so much quicker than anything Hollywood made overseas constantly. It's always running in those theaters and making billions and or millions and millions of dollars to contribute to that, which is part of the sort of lasting impact. I also feel like Avatar appeals to a fan base and a generation that's a lot older than the people that we would be talking to in fandom circles. Like when Way of Water came out, every single person at work was talking about it, wanting to see it, buying tickets ahead of time. And these are people who are like 10 to 20 to 30 years older than me. They're all just stoked out of their minds for Way of Water. And sure enough, when I got to the theater and saw Way of Water for the first time and saw Fire and Ash a few weeks ago, there's nobody in there my age or younger. Everyone in the theater is just packed with older people. And like, some of them will bring like their little kids here and there. But for the most part, it's a very different sort of general demographic than what you'd see with other stuff. So like people are always saying these things like Avatar has no cultural impact. But when you say that, you start to have to define like, what do you mean by cultural impact? Are you saying that there aren't people all over the world that love Avatar? Because that's not true. Are you saying that the theaters aren't packed when an Avatar movie comes out? Because that's not true. Are you saying the merchandise doesn't sell? Because that's not true. Or are you just saying that people don't talk about it online? Because that might be true, except for the fact that they're always talking about how no one's talking about it.
See, I think that the thing for me is I just don't see it like... I don't see it referenced or ragged on outside of just the fact that, like, it's kind of forgotten about. Like, you see just random Star Wars references or just general, like, superhero references. You see references to, like, just movies that came out, years ago at this point, still just get, like, thrown into different pop culture media, whether that be, like, late night stand-up bits or just, a gag in a TV show or something. And I feel like that just didn't happen with Avatar 1 and less so with 2 and 3, just because they came out more concurrently. I think that's maybe another part of it, is just the fact that, like, he had this plan for this, like, 5-movie series, and, like, the first one came out, and then he waited over a decade to release the second one. And then I actually was a bit shocked to see Fire and Ash already in theaters. I was like, oh, wait, shit, that's happening already?
Lucky for the third one, they filmed the second and third one back to back, so it was a quicker turnaround with the exception of rendering all the effects.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that makes sense. I haven't seen the third one yet. I will say, like, going to the amusement park, the ride for Avatar was really fucking cool, and just I have defended the first one, even though I haven't really watched it a number of times, as I think James Cameron just really wanted to make a very visually appealing and beautiful movie, and that the story was secondary to him. So, like, a lot of people that I saw complain about the first one, their complaints are, like, mostly plot or character focused, and I'm like, it's not that he's not trying, it's just that's not his main intent or goal. Mm-hmm. And I will say, going on the ride, being around the world of Pandora and all that stuff, I was like, man, it is really, really just absolutely gorgeous. And then I felt the same way watching this one. I just cannot help but be a bit blue-pilled about the, like, world of Pandora. It's just so just lush and beautiful and stuff. And it was funny because Hilly and I actually stayed up late to finish it the other night, because we decided we wanted to watch it all in one go, because we're parents and we don't get to do that very often. And I as the credits were rolling and stuff, and I'm shutting things down, I go, "Did you love it?" And she's like, it was good." I'm like, "Okay, do I have to, like, be worried about you at all?" And she's like, "Why?" I go, "You don't remember back when the first one came out and, like, all the people were sad that they couldn't go live on Pandora, so they killed themselves?" So I think maybe that's where the cultural impact went. Maybe the people that would have been doing... Yeah, they just all killed themselves. As terrible as that is.
It's like the bit about the 2020 election and Trump. The reason he didn't win is because everyone died of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. It's an interesting beast, the Avatar franchise. And there's other things to talk about. I just wanted to get it on the cultural impact. Steve, not Steve, Alfie, you've been pretty quiet. What's your like cultural impression of Avatar?
Well, I feel like Steve touched on it a little bit, but I think a lot of it had to come down to, I think when the first one came out, that he had publicly announced like, hey, this is going to be like a bunch of movies, right? Like, but like he's dropped like five like straight away as like it's like, I'm going to do five Avatar movies. It kind of sounded like a bit of a joke, like, because it was like, hey man, it's like, you're taking this long to do this. You're really going to be able to do these things? Like, I've got personal experience with that. People kind of stop taking you seriously after a certain amount of time. You said you're going to do stuff. So, like, he dropped these, and the first movie, I don't think even really necessarily lends itself to, like, a franchise per se. It doesn't really, in the same way that like Titanic isn't something you can really build like a fandom around. Like, you can have movie critics and people who enjoy cinema being like, oh, that was a good movie, or just regular people just went and saw it. It's like, oh, it was a good movie, but it's not something people are gonna write like fan fiction about per se. There's always going to be some people, but en masse. So I feel like for a long time, the reason why Avatar didn't have a cultural imprint is because it was a spectacle at the time. It had like a novelty. It was one of the first movies that really like used 3D as a selling point.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like really fresh at the time, and the visuals for the time
And
it
everything started doing 3D after it. Theirs was its cultural impact.
right. Like it had a lot
Like
of imitators.
5 years after, everybody was doing 3D.
And it led to a lot of innovations in the tech industry for rendering 3D environments and 3D characters, and you can kind of see the pipeline of where that went to when we get to stuff like the Volume and stuff, but from the Lucasfilm guys. So there was definitely an impact. It was just more of an understated. Again, I'd compare it to just a regular blockbuster movie that wasn't tied to a specific IP prior. Once we got to Way of Water, that started to change a little bit, but it was still, people were still making kind of the same jokes. Like, this made a bunch of money, but no one really cared. Now I'm starting to see more of an Avatar fandom pop up with the Fire and Ash movie, where people seem, now that 3 movies deep and they're more familiar with all these characters, and they kind of feel like, all right, maybe the next few movies might actually get made. There is more of like a cultural impact, but outside of the internet, you still don't really see like, I've never seen anyone in the wild wear a piece of Pandora merch, like ever, like in my entire life. And I've been to 2 countries at this point, so like, I've had a wide breadth of like, hey, have I ever seen this? It's like, no, I've seen people wear, I don't know, like the most niche random comic book. I've seen Darkwing merch, but I haven't seen the Avatar merch. So like, I feel like it was something that wasn't really built for that. But now it has. Now it's kind of like leaning more into that fandom, and I think that's an interesting evolution because it's taken place over such a period of time. That's kind of why I wanted to talk about Way of Water instead of the first one. Is I feel like this whole thing only really came into focus for me with the second movie, where it started to feel like, okay, there's maybe something more here. Like, there's maybe something you can actually sink your teeth into aside from a visual effects showcase.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I did see more pickup about just cultural buzz, the zeitgeist around Way of Water, and we've got our friend in the server that's like in love with the vision to the point where it's like a fucking meme.
Yeah.
And I love it. It's great. I love the agenda and I respect it. But it's also like such an interesting thing because there's like an ick factor to Avatar as well, because I feel like in what do we call it, the wilderness years between the Pandora installments, in those years between, I feel like really the only conversation that got had around Avatar that I saw like on a regular basis was this idea of cultural appropriation. And I think Steve and I have even had a conversation about this in the past too. But I remember I was watching something that was it was a video essay by a Native American creator who was talking about the way that Hollywood uses indigenous faces and indigenous stories. And he's just like going through like all these movies that are made about indigenous people that don't really bother to hire like a consultant or anything, and just make all this money and don't give any of it to the people that they're, you know, making movies about. And then like just as he was like totaling up the profits made from all these things, then it just hits Avatar, and like the profit thing goes through the roof, and I'm like, I don't even know if Avatar should count at that point. Is kind of where I'm at in the conversation. Just thinking about it, and I don't know if we want to get into that right now, or if we want to just save that one for a little bit later. But I do feel like there's a level of complexity to it that's or nuance that's been lost in a lot of the critiques about that. But I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts. So do we want to start there, or do we want to start with more just like general takes on Way of Water?
Let's maybe start with like talking generally about Way of Water and then kind of lead into that, because I think it's going to be an unavoidable part of the conversation, but I feel like using that to set the tone might present a disingenuous picture about how we feel about the
I
movie.
agree, yeah, because I
Okay.
like that's also an element of why I chose Way of Water, because I feel like this one is the one that's got like the most minimized version of those elements. But we'll talk about it later.
Sure, sure. So yeah, Way of Water, like I said, as I was watching it, I actually really enjoyed it. I think it's quite good. It's not something I can see myself putting on over and over again or anything like that. But I would not mind giving it another watch, because again, it's just so freaking cool to see like this this unimpeded creative vision. Is I think the thing I like most about these movies, and Way of Water. It like there's a whole scene about whaling, right? Like it's a whole subplot of the movie. You kind of see just James Cameron's baby in that. That he just it's all the things James Cameron cares about put into one movie. It would seem, and he just presents this absolutely beautiful vision for the screen. And that's like just outside of whether or not you are insulted by or care about the story or whatever. I just don't think you can deny looking at the movie that there's so much care and thought and just intent put into the visualization that you don't really get that floaty MC like rushed MCU visual effects feel on like even a single shot. I'm just so immersed within it that I'm often having like a hard time remembering that, oh yeah, everything I'm seeing is 100% in a computer at this point. And I just think that's so incredibly impressive. Really, really appreciate it for that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love this movie. I think it's great. I mentioned in the Discord earlier when we were discussing using this for when Alfie picked this movie, and I said it was going to be hard for me to talk about it without spoiling or talking around Fire and Ash. So if either of you care about Fire and Ash spoilers, let me know. But I think watching this Fire and Ash and then going back to this, the third movie actually retroactively makes this a much better movie, because the
Oh.
two are very much like a two-parter. Watching this in isolation a couple years ago when it came out, or I guess it's been like 3 years now or 4 years now, I don't know. Whenever this came out, watching this in the theater, it feels like this big, grand family epic about Jake Sully, about the kids that he's had, about the relationship between him and Quattridge as his antagonist and foil, about the way Pandora is a much bigger world with different cultures, and it's gorgeous and it's intimate and it's a really good story. But the more I was looking in on like the individual character dynamics and stuff, the more it kind of felt to me like Empire Strikes Back. The more it was like there were scenes and scenes and so much stuff happening here that only really clicks after you watch Fire and Ash and you realize that this is just part one of the larger journey. Because this movie, it kind of doesn't end. And you don't realize that right off the bat, but Spider saves his dad, but then the military never goes away. The invasions never actually stopped. And then the third movie picks up almost immediately after where this leaves off, because they know that this is just the start of a larger attack. And that's where the rest of it goes. And there's a lot of stuff with their eldest daughter and Jake becoming more of like a military style dad, and the relationship he has to his kid after his eldest son dies. There's so many layers to the way the dynamics work here that only kind of come full circle when you go to Fire and Ash. But at its core, I think part of what makes this good in hindsight too is Fire and Ash turns out to be the big epic grand finale, and this in retrospect becomes a much more intimate story about fatherhood, about kids rebelling, about the relationship we have to different cultures, and how can we ever truly assimilate into something else. So I think this is a great movie. I really, really love it. I like it more than Fire and Ash, I think. But given that we just rewatched this, I might go back to the theater and watch Fire and Ash again just to see.
Cool.
Sorry, I like this movie a lot as well. I don't like it as much as you two do, but I do think this is a good movie. I did really enjoy my time with this, and I think it's a really impressive movie. I think this is the one where we get to kind of put our characters in an unfamiliar situation, and the family dynamic with the children and Neytiri, and how they have to kind of adapt to this world while being something of it while also being different, I think is really compelling. I think they're much stronger to kind of ground a narrative around than Jake Sully is in the first one. And it's a lot more of a unique narrative. It's just a lot one that like feels like we can take this in a lot of different directions, and push these characters in a way where, like, again, I'm not the first movie I don't really like. I think it has a lot of elements that are worth talking about, but I don't think it's a particularly good movie. A lot of that comes down to I just don't like Jake Sully as a protag. I think he's really, really boring. But I like his children and I like his wife. So when we focus on them, I think they're more interesting to talk about, and we spend a lot of time focused on them in this, especially once we get past that first hour, which is kind of like catching people back up who it had been 10 years. So like I get like you have to kind of set the scene and give it back. Once we get to the Water Tribe and we're going through the motions and the learning to try and adapt to this new way of life, we see kind of the customs and the exile and all that kind of stuff. I think it's really strong from that point onwards all the way to the end. I've seen Fire Ash as well. I've got more problems with that movie. I still think that movie is solid as well. I like that one more than the first, but it kind of has more of the same issue the first one had, which we'll get into later on. But I think this one just kind of works as a standalone piece, just about appreciating the world, appreciating your place in it, and kind of finding purpose in something that can seem like completely overwhelming and easy to push into like a nihilistic mindset because it's just so huge. And once you ground yourself and you kind of embrace kind of the simple things and the beauty of the whole thing, you can find like belonging in that, be it family or nature. And I think that's all really, really well said and really profound in this movie.
Yeah, for me, again, I'm so much more focused on the visuals of this, just coming from a background where I really started to fall in love with that stuff. And so just some of the vision and creativity here is just so cool. Like, I love, it's easy to talk about, oh, the creature design is so cool, and it is, like, the fact that the whale analog have, like, these big horns and these armored ridges, and like the horns serve an actual purpose for sonar communication and stuff. I thought that was really cool. But then there's just like the people also get cool stuff, which I think was kind of arguably missing a little bit from the first one. Like the not quad, the double copter fighters were kind of cool in the first one, but nah. And the mech suits were pretty basic. But like, man, all the subs are so cool, especially the fucking crab ones. Those are sick. And like the boats that they're on are like it's got that like Empire, TIE fighter kind of energy to it. And so I really just liked the visual creativity put on display there. It could have just looked, because there's this tendency with a lot of sci-fi now to just make things look overly practical, or just somehow streamlined is equivalent to basic or just simplistic. And I like that these like just look kind of clunky and kind of weird, but like functional, and certainly dangerous when you start to see them really get into action and stuff. So that was really cool.
The visuals, I mean, there's just no comparison as far as like movies with this much CGI that look this good. Even when you're watching it on a TV, and you're able to see the textures of the skin, the uneven patterns that people just naturally kind of have, the actual like dimension to the surroundings where it doesn't feel like everyone's just standing in front of a green screen. And this Fire and Ash and the first Avatar, they all are like worth seeing in 3D. They're maybe the only movies worth seeing in 3D, because James Cameron's actually doing stuff with the filmmaking where the 3D effects look good and add to the experience. There's something that he does in all of them that I really like that happens a lot more in A Way of Water than it does with the other two, where he'll take the camera and he'll push into a scene, but because you're pushing in to a forest setting or pushing past difficult terrain, he's using the 3D effect so that you're moving past an obstacle and then seeing characters in the middle of the frame, and your eyes are kind of startled by the object that's always right in front of you, because you're always seeing something in 3 dimensions like it's just right there. He's got all these great uses of making landmarks or signature pieces or flowers or rocks or whatever to kind of orient your eyes to make that third dimension feel way more pronounced. Like, no one's doing visual storytelling on a big blockbuster like James Cameron. It's just one of the most gorgeous movies, just right from the jump. Like the first shot to the last, it always looks good, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. The sequence where the sky people return, like, oh my god, just the landing craft with the rocket
Just gorgeous.
afterburners that just destroy land just to land, that just destroy jungle and forest just to land. The act of arrival is destructive, is just so perfect for the story. Because, like, again, with you could do the Star Trek thing. Technically, they should be that advanced. Or you could do, the Star Wars thing where they just kind of hover down and land. But it's like, it's just a little jank. It's just a little clunky. And it uses it to just such great effect. And I also just like the look of the spaceships with their big solar sails and shit is so cool.
And to that point too, right? Like, they do all of these fantastical things. They have weird looking creatures, they have weird looking ships, but part of what makes all that stuff, all the weirdness, still feel grounded and dangerous is the fire of the forest burning, the act of Quattridge burning the water tribe's homes down, the fact that they're using guns with real bullets and not just lasers. So you're seeing all of this like beautiful majesty that get incinerated by something that feels so banal in comparison.
Yeah, no, for
I
sure.
agree. Feel like it's an absolutely stunning movie.
Did you guys have like a particular visual that like really, really just caught you in the moment?
For sure.
I always, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. The one that sticks for me for sure, I think, is the shot of the entire franchise is when we see the hand holding shot with the whale. And we just pan down, and just how that moment lingers and how the build up to that moment hits. It just feels like that's kind of like James Cameron made this entire world just for that shot. Like, it feels like that's his dream fantasy, that he had a dream of where he was best friends with a whale, and it was tortured, he was tortured, and together they found peace. Like, it just feels like we were all spending billions of dollars to get to this. So I love that. That shot's fantastic.
It's like the Toriyama moment. Oh no, now I gotta make the rest of the movies.
Exactly right. It's like, oh, there's 3 more movies.
Kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, because that's a really wholesome shot. The one that always kind of sticks with me from this movie is towards the very end when they get Netiem's body on that little piece of land, and his younger brother is literally got his brother's blood on his hands, and in frame you've got the body, him looking at his hands, and Netiri just crying over it. It's heartbreaking, but like it looks about as real as anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I was so shocked that he died as quickly as he did. You know, there's usually like the tendency to have him say something like profound before he goes, or like for everyone to get the chance to say that they love him, and like they're like right in the middle of that, and then he's just gone.
Yeah.
That was like legitimately upsetting, and so I think it really helped to hammer home a lot of those moments of grief, and then just the fact that like, all right, grieve later. Right now, we need to go kill this son of a bitch. Was also like, you could say Jake Sully's not a great character, but I'll give him this. This is a great fucking moment.
I do disagree with Alfie in that I actually love Jake Sully as a character throughout these movies. But before we move on to that, the final battle and like those sequences in particular, I think are another really good showcase of like what does good CGI look like beyond just making weird things possible? Because what you're getting in those moments is you're getting people with thick braided hair that's frizzing up because it's been in the water. So it's wet, it's frizzy, it's being lit by moonlight and fire at the same time. You've got dry skin versus wet skin. You've got these entire elaborate action sequences that move between the water to the land, to the point where they filmed an entire fight between these two guys underwater, knowing full well that like doing a chokehold to a guy underwater might literally kill him. Like it's incredible, like the technology and the practice and the filmmaking that goes into making something so minimal look so good at every turn.
I love how fucking big they look. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
like that was a thing with the first movie where it was so rare for them to be around the people at the same time that like the discrepancy in height, the fact that the Na'vi are like what 9 foot tall or some shit, the discrepancy in height just like didn't feel as natural when you did actually see it in the movie, whereas this one, because they just have them around different people so frequently throughout the film, just did such a great job of establishing and naturalizing that distinction in scale, which is just, you know, it's subtle, but it's a great way to further justify the use of CGI, because like to do something like this before, I can't tell you the number of like fucking Star Trek aliens that is just a dude that's a different color with shit on his face, right? Whereas this, like, their proportion, they're not just tall people, right? Their proportions are longer. They're more like stretched out and stuff. So like it just feels, even though they've still got, you know, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, blah blah blah. So they're still pretty human, all things considered, but they're just that subtleness of stretching out the proportions and then showing that next to a person and having them interact as frequently as we do in this film, I think really does help just to further like immerse you in the world, in the reality, and just helps to like sell the idea.
And the idea too that like different Na'vi from different places evolve differently. So like when they get to the tribe of the water people, they're making fun of their thin tails and their scrawny arms because everyone there has got bodies built for swimming compared to them. And when you look at those two, they're clearly of the same species or of the same planet, but they look distinct enough to be different designs. They've got their own details to them. You could freeze frame at like any moment in those scenes, and every background character, every Navi that they run into, there's so much care put into like these things are all going to look unique. They're going to look humanoid, but they're still going to preserve a sense of continuity of like, if you belonged to this culture, these are the things that you would wear. And Cameron cares so much about that stuff. And as part of the story, it doesn't necessarily matter. Like, you can make a whole Navi language, it doesn't matter to the viewer. But when you're making a world that has to be this immersive in order for the story to work, those little details go a really long way, because you're the viewer is being invited into that world and learning these things as the characters do. So the more natural it seems, the more detail there is to it, the more it starts to feel like I can believe that this is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say you mentioned the language thing, and it's in a weird place because I famously cannot stand subtitles. But I will say it did feel like the biggest cop out in the world to just go. One day it just all sounded like English to me, and I was
I
like,
know, that was so stupid. That was so
Yeah.
stupid.
I get that.
Like-
You gotta just let that one slide at least.
Yeah, no, but like there are so many movies where like that's a problem, where people just start speaking English when they're not meant to speak English. And like historically there's a lot of cool like workarounds between that and stuff, like whether it's John Wick with its stylized subtitles, or A Hunt for Red October where they zoom into the lips and then zoom out or something like that. But there is just something about like him saying that it all started sounding like English. And not only do they start talking, but they start talking with like American teenager colloquialisms immediately.
bro.
Yeah.
That
I like to think that Jake Sully's fucking American jingoistic shit was just genetic. So like he just brought the slang, just was like the moment they came out, they're just like, oh my god, bro, did you see the Patriots last night?
and dude, and as weird as it feels at first, you kind of love it as it goes on, particularly when they get to the bully water kids and he's like, it's called a punch, bitch.
Yeah. I'm here for that. I mean, they had to only have heard it from him. Like,
Right. It's awesome. As it goes on, it becomes awesome. It's just that one scene.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like it's really weird because it does kind of get back into the whole native culture thing, because not only do we just decide to have all the characters speak English even though we created a language. I don't know if James Cameron has the balls to release the Na'vi cut of this movie.
Only one stopping him is him.
Yeah, but like I thought it was kind of like also just a little bit not weak, but just like a really moment when like they go to the water tribe and by implication the water tribe also only speaks the one language, because if they are like this is another race, right? They are their skin is a lighter shade of blue. They have like different genetic features, so they clearly have lived like quite separate existences, even if they've made contact several times. So it's just a bit like beyond credulity that they don't also speak their own language, though I guess you could maybe make the argument that they're just really nice and everyone's speaking the tree language, the jungle language, I guess.
It's just like common, everyone just speaks common. Doesn't matter what race or species you are.
Yeah,
Everyone just knows common.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. So like those things just kind of on the periphery, I did notice, and kind of go, okay, all right, whatever. I guess we're going with it. But I remember when the Way of Water first hit DVD and streaming, Leah saw the trailer of like the whale, and she's like, I want to watch that movie, and we got about 5 minutes into it, but it was enough to get to one day it just started to sound like English. I was like, okay. And then coming back to it a second time, I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
To Alfie's point, though, like, I know you were joking, but, like, to your point, this idea that his kids have inherited the colloquialisms and slang of him is a really interesting way to start talking about like what the actual arc for Jake here is that transcends from this into Fire and Ash. And part of why I think he is actually a really good character, because the motion capture in this is so good that the actors are legitimately able to give performances. People are acting through this, and I think Sam Worthington gives a really good performance as Jake Sully. And I really like this idea that the second he realizes that his sort of happy ending life in Pandora is over, the second he realizes that the Sky People are coming back, he turns into a military guy again. He talks to his kids about obeying and disobeying orders. He teaches them how to fire guns. He's regimenting their lives. He's giving them communicators. This notion that his whole family, the thing that he's trying to preserve, he is tearing apart because he is bringing these human sensibilities to them, while at the same time his wife is stewing on this kind of racist resentment of humanity because of what they did to her planet. And that conflict getting a chance to kind of play out over the course of this, and coming to a head here where his son dies, and he like just straight up blames his other son for it going into the next movie. That he literally looks his kid in the eye and says, "It's your fault, your brother is dead." And it doesn't feel like it's ever going too far in that movie, because he's just such a dick to his younger son in this movie. And in a way you do sort of like understand it, because he's always like this weird quagmire of a person. He's always all about protecting the Na'vi. He's all about immersing himself in their culture, but he's always doing things to it that feel like it's sacrilegious to them. That he's riding around on their beasts and he's firing guns. Fact that he's always teaching his kids to obey things like they're still in the military. And the sort of great irony of it is like his arch nemesis in this, who Stephen Lang's also incredible as Quattro. He's my favorite character in these movies. His arch nemesis goes through the same process. They're both not human anymore, and they both have an opportunity to leave those ways behind. And Sully almost kind of comes across as a bit of a hypocrite because he keeps espousing that to Stephen Lang's character, but he never fully embraces it himself. And that's part of why these two movies kind of feel like they're two halves of a greater whole, because Stephen Lang's journey about doing that is more in the next movie, and establishing more of a Sully's place in doing that, it happens in this movie. But at the end of the day, in just this movie, both of them are dealing with what kind of dads do they want to be. And both of them, even though they're on opposite ends, are kind of shitty dads.
I would
Yeah,
agree. Go ahead, Alfie. You got
I
more
was
of
just,
a
I was just gonna say,
stronger
I think
feeling
all of that's
against it.
there on. It's okay. uh, I think all of that's there on paper for sure. Sam Worthington's performance just is boring. Like, I just do not like this guy. Like, just like there's just something there with just how he delivers his lines. The fact, like, again, we'll get more into it, but it is just so distracting every time I look at this character, and he has dreads, and he's like fully this part of this, and I know who's under that skin. Like, I know the person doing that, and it just makes me. It's just like a kind of an impenetrable barrier for me to get into him as a character when I'm just like, this just gives me this gives me the ick. Whereas his children and Naturi and even Quaritch, because he's a bad guy, right? Like, Quaritch is like, okay, he's doing this for war, and then as a result of it, it's kind of opening up his inhibitions and his third eye, and he's being reborn in this different way. With Jake Sully, it feels like he never really. There's like a lot of time spent in the first movie with him going on kind of like the traditional hero's arc of like he has a big fuck up and he has to make up for it kind of thing, but it never landed for me in a way where I particularly cared about him beyond being the generic protag to get the stuff moving, and that stays here. But I think him being that way works really well as an opposing force to his son. And I think just want to make sure I pronounce the name here correctly. I think Loark is a really interesting character of being the kid of this dude who was this Pocahontas hero's journey chosen one character who now has incredible expectations for his son, and has an older brother who kind of lives up to those expectations a little bit more, and he always feels like he's never going to be enough for his dad, and he doesn't know why he's kind of always brushing up against that, and he has to kind of find his own path. And Fire and Ash does a lot of work with him as well, which I think is really good as well. So that is much more of something I can, like, all right, this is a character I can relate to. This is a character I can understand your motivations. This is a character I can fully get behind. On Natiri, where she loses her son at the end of this, and her rage from that, and how she feels about, like, I feel that heart in the moment. When Jake looks at his son, I get that it's meant to be sad, but the performance just doesn't give me anything to latch onto there from him. It's just too military. It's just too bog standard American soldier hero, right? And that's just the last kind of character I'm ever going to get interested in.
I guess I'm like more in the middle between you two. I don't like feel any active hostility toward Jake Sully, but I'm still a little bit more with Alfie of like he's the one I'm here for kind of the least. Which is interesting because like your whole point of I'm never going to get into like the American military hero thing of like yeah, me either, but the character I like the most in this is the American military.
No, I agree. He's my favorite character as well.
He's the best. He's so good.
Because you can instantly redeem that by making it fucked and acknowledging it as fucked. That's fun.
Which, and again, I think they do, right? Like, I think the great sort of dramatic momentum of all three of these movies is that Quattridge and Jake are the same person. It's just a matter of are they willing to admit that, or are they just going to be kind of locked into this because they fight each other and Quattridge dies essentially 3 times in a row, and that repetitious cycle of that conflict, I think, is the main sort of driving motivator. Because I think one way you could read these movies is you could read them in the first two to a greater extent because they're told from Jake's perspective. That all this conflict with the Sky People, all this conflict with Quattridge, this idea that Quattridge also has a son that he can never connect to, that because he narrates these, all of this is just an expression of the fact that Sully can never actually be a part of Pandora. He can never actually fully assimilate into the culture. And the movies are always kind of playing out this conflict with him and the military when they go into their avatars and they have Na'vi bodies of saying like, you can have this body as much as you want, but there's always going to be something pulling you back. There's always going to be this greater fact of the people that you come from, the reason you were here in the first place, the things that you have imbued on your family and your kids, one of which gets your own kid killed, is all right there in front of you, and you're always fighting that. You're always fighting Quattridge because deep down that's exactly who you are. And he tries to resist that, but it can never really stop because that's kind of the deeper struggle he's always going through. And that's also why Quattridge is so interesting, is because he's a bad guy that cartoonishly loves being a bad guy. But every time that level of humanity comes in, like when he doesn't want Natiri to kill his son because he knows that she's gonna do it, that she doesn't like this kid, that the fact that like Spider saves him and he thinks that they're gonna go away together, the fact that he stops the kid from being tortured, there is this like humanity to him where he has feelings for a child that he has no reason to take responsibility for in that moment. He has this big dramatic gesture where he crushes his own human skull because he's been reborn into something else.
Fucking moment, man.
It's so cool, but like it's also like this. It's this great dramatic gesture that reminds you this is what he kind of wishes he could do. He wishes he could just smash the humanity out of him, but the truth is that can never go away, just like he can never go away for Sully.
Yeah. God, I fucking love that moment so much. I want to talk about the blue team, blue team 6, as it were. Because
imagine getting a 9-foot-tall Na'vi body, and the first thing you do is get tattoos and like aviators.
Right? That was my fucking thing with them. It's like they're all wearing like the army kit gear, and they're like. the idea, because like it's military, which means it's standard issue. They don't make that in different sizes, so someone had to fucking sit there and like tailor it to their size. But like more than that, the one guy's got the sunglasses. They had to make those special for him. And that's so funny to me.
I just want to know how the fuck a tattoo artist tattoos a Navi body. Because they've all decked out in skull tattoos and shit. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great. Like it's so weird because like there's just that like one of the things that gets thrown against the first movie so much is just this idea that it is so full of cultural appropriation, blah blah blah, blah, and that it's cosplaying or putting on blueface basically. And again, we'll get there eventually, but I think the thing that this movie tries to establish is showing you, no, this is what that actually looks like. Because like the thing in particular about Blue Team 6 is they all still do like very Earthman haircuts to the point that the one still shaves his head clean, which makes the tentacle mind portal thingy stand out and just look so out of place and weird. Whereas like the Na'vi, they all do like, you know, different forms of braids or dreads or whatever, which like feels more natural because it blends in with the head thing. I'm pissing somebody off because there's definitely a name for it, but fuck it, I'm just gonna commit.
Don't worry, there was no cultural impact.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just like I think that they do just such a good job of explaining, or like again through what you were talking about of just pure visual storytelling. They don't acknowledge the fact that they still all look military. They don't acknowledge that they all still dress as Earthmen, even though they're sitting there talking about, no, we're going to do everything the way Sully did it. We're going to go full native, and they just don't. At any like they don't pick up any natural weapons. They're still using all these like manufactured materials and such. By the way, side point, incredibly small minor thing, but like if I were dealing with a race of hostile aliens and I was trying to take over their planet and I'm shipping like arms across my different settler cities and such, maybe make a thing where you just, no matter what, you're not going to get a fucking Navi finger in that trigger hole and then your problem solved. But that's just me. Like, from a manufacturing standpoint, that's a design flaw. The fact that they can just pick these things up and use them, because like human fingers are tinier, so make it a tinier gap, and then they won't be able to use your fucking weapons against you, you morons.
No, you're 100% right about everything with Blue Team 6. They're so like preposterous and cartoony to a degree, but it just works because the characters are meant to be, like you said, appropriating more of the culture. They're more wolves in sheep's clothing. They can go through the planet without setting off those natural defenses because everyone thinks that they're just Navi, even though they're not really. And that sort of adds to that larger question of like, just because you're in that body, does that mean you're of that culture? Or just because you mirror the aesthetic, does that mean that that's who you are? And that's sort of the choice that Sully makes that none of these guys end up making, and why there's such a dichotomy between them. Cameron does a lot of really great stuff with Quattridge waking up in the Navi body. There's a really good scene where his world literally turns upside down because the camera moves from an upside down perspective as he's watching his last recorded video to him about what happened. And they do a really good job of having his reflection of the Navi face showing up on screen side by side with his human face, and everything moving around behind them where you're seeing the other military guys just kind of hanging out and stuff. There's just so much of like, in the frame, Quattridge is kind of questioning his humanity and who he is because of how those images are shot. And those are the kinds of considerations where like, this isn't just CGI that was added into a scene. This was a scene that is filmed with the intention of, the visual effects are part of this larger filmmaking tool we want to use to make sure that you as the viewer understand these characters on a deeper level without us having to throw all of it at you in dialogue. And that's part of what makes like Stephen Lang such a good fit for this, because he's so emotive. He's got such a great like generic bad guy voice. He's loving every second of it. So like that sort of cartoonishly over the topness is so enticing. It's so charismatic. Um, but anytime you stop and talk about him, or anytime he's in the movie, there's always just so much care put into like, what is this guy's presence here signifying in the sort of larger scope of it. Even when Cameron is careful to make him feel triumphant, like when he tames one of those flying creatures and stuff, versus when he makes him feel more demonic. When they're like just savagely burning down the tribes and stuff, like he's really playing sort of fast and loose with like how much are you supposed to like him, and I think that's part of why he makes such a great villain.
That and just the way that he's like, if the fact that you know that if his son were not there, he would just be going even harder on the
Yep.
colonizer shit.
100%, yeah.
The moment where he's like, "I will put a bullet in your head if you do not tell me where you've seen this man," and the one Na'vi soldier goes like, or Avatar soldier, whatever you want to call the distinction, goes, "Am I really gonna smoke her?" And he just looks over to Spider. He's like, "Burn down the village."
Yeah!
Like, that's his fucking compromised position. Commit a different war crime. Is just fantastic. He's deliciously evil and complex, but he doesn't want to. Like, he doesn't care that he's evil, but he doesn't want to think of himself that way. And just being seen as that by his son that he doesn't want to admit is his son is just, like, so fucking with him. It's fantastic. Yeah. Also, side note about just the entirety of Blue Team 6, Quatrich included, man, if you go fucking die for your... Not even for your country. If you go fucking die for your mining company... and then they bring your ass back to go die again, I'd be pissed.
That's the other sort of big dystopian thing of like you just die and then you come back and die again. That's just how this works out.
Oh man, like that's what fucking Avatar 5 needs to be. It's just a fucking army of quatraches.
And you know, like that's also sort of part of like the bookends of this movie, where like he comes back and he's reanimated because his body and his death mean nothing. He breaks his own human skull. He's just in this service in perpetuity. And then on the back half of the movie, there is a lot of time and patience to like the energy that life is just energy that's borrowed, that the body has to go back somewhere, and that they take a great deals to like make that funeral feel mournful and see what happens to their oldest son when he gets put into the ground, knowing full well that that's contrasting with what the avatars are and what the military is doing, and that on two opposite ends of the movie, these are two opposite ways of living your life.
So I want to go back to, because I think we've put it off for a while. I think it's a good time to talk about it, because you were talking about how the stuff with Quaritch, you said like, oh, this is what that really looks like when you're doing the blue face stuff, and I think,
or at least what I think Cameron's intending it to,
right,
to
and I do
response to.
think. I'll start by saying I do think his heart is in the right place. I don't think Cameron is making these with ill intent. I think he has he's got a good perspective on it. But he is, at the end of the day, an extremely white man. A very rich white man, and he has a very limited perspective, and he is very specifically, for a point, with the human characters that we see, casting mostly white people for the canoliness side, right? That's intentional, but it doesn't hurt the fact that even when you look behind the scenes, who are playing the Na'vi, it's a lot of white faces, and these characters are depicted with varying different cultural faces depending on the tribe we're going to, but it's very the implications from indigenous people especially is from the first movie. This was like extremely blatant. um is something that's been criticized a lot. Is something that people have talked up about feeling that these are tropes that we should have grown past. These are tropes that existed 130 years ago that we're repeating, and I feel like it is something that is a stain on the franchise, because no matter how well you tell the story of colonialism is bad, if you're a white man telling it, there's a ceiling there. Like, no matter what, there's just inherently, you're not gonna have the same perspective on that as someone of color or someone of from indigenous people or stuff like that. So like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're bad for liking these movies, or that these movies can't have elements of that where it's handled well. But I do think it's something where it can't be dismissed, and whenever it chooses to focus on, say, like Spider as a character, right? And you see this white kid in dreads, and he's running
Who
around.
literally like paints his skin blue and runs around and like wishes that he could breathe the same air as them and stuff.
Right, and it's a lot.
And it's a lot, but I feel like that is an intentional choice from the filmmaker to try to communicate something about this criticism, about this idea. I don't know. I spent a lot of time thinking about this over the weekend. Because I remember at one point my takeaway was kind of like, is there value to the white savior story? Just, irrespective of its very nasty use through history. I was thinking a lot about the fact that like Star Trek has 3 separate white savior plot lines between original series and Next Generation. And like Cisco is not a white man, but he's also the like stand-in for the Federation, who's becoming their god for this people that he's overseeing. So there's elements of it there. So I was like sitting there trying to think of like, if you remove the element, just the bare bones idea of person from the colonial force becomes infatuated, falls in love with, and decides to betray his own people and stand with and defend the people that he was sent to conquer. Just as that like basic element, if that is the white savior trope, is there any value to that by just completely removing the direct connection of, well, they're not actually, we're not saying this with this race of actual people, we're just completely fictionalizing it to create just its own independent culture. And my takeaway was like, oh, I think it kind of works a little bit better then. And I'm not sure if I still necessarily agree with that, but that was definitely in the back of my head as I was watching this one. Especially with like Blue Team 6 and Spider kind of serving as commentary on the idea of like, where is the line on appropriating these other cultures and stuff. It's go ahead.
Sorry, you can finish your point.
No, I was just going to say it's very complex, and I feel like it is more complex than it is presented as by people critiquing it, if that's fair.
Yeah, no, so I agree with you. I think part of the problem with this kind of conversation is people always kind of get hung up on the whether or not somebody should be doing a thing, and that sort of forgets the fact, like, okay, maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but they have done it. So now that they have done it, let's maybe engage with how they have done it and whether or not that is detrimental or useful, like you're saying. And I think I broadly agree, Alfie, with your point, but I do feel like that's sort of the problem is like broadly, yes, but like when we start going into like specifics of the movie and specifics about the way it's used, then the conversation gets a little bit more muddy. When it comes to cultural appropriation in philosophy of race, there's a really famous argument where like some people posit that there's no such thing as being able to fully assimilate into a culture. that if you are born in one place, then there is no amount of study, time, practice, anything that you could do that would properly assimilate you into a place that you were not born into. Uh, the counter argument to that is, well, that's not true because people are born and they learn things. You're always being assimilated into a culture. If you are born and you're able to learn things, then you can by definition be born anywhere and learn things. So like the idea that people could learn their own culture is a testament to the fact that there is a possibility that you could go somewhere else and learn those things and become part of that. The thing about Avatar that becomes really complicated with this, I feel like, is the problem is less about, I think, whether or not the white savior part of it is good or bad, and more about the fact that the limits of James Cameron's imagination seem boundless until you realize that it is just a white savior narrative. I think that's kind of the broader problem. Um, because when we're talking about the sort of like caricature of indigenous people and Native Americans that all these avatars and all these Navi embody, I think that like you could spend a lot of time talking about like this brings up some like sort of weird gross feelings about caricatures that we've seen through history and the idea of like this white person's perspective on these things that he can never really know fully, and like there's a lot of uncomfortable parallels in the third movie especially, and it's hard to like properly buy into a culture that is just like a white person's bastardization of a bunch of other cultures. I think that that's all well and good, but I think the sort of more damning thing about the whole thing is like James Cameron had infinite money and time to make whatever he wanted, and the best thing he could come up with is brown people, but they're blue, is kind of the worst thing about it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. I was you were talking about like actual history, and I was sitting there trying to think of, we make all these movies with this white savior plot, and I don't really know the I personally have not like looked into the validity of like, is The Last Samurai starring Tom Cruise that came out in 2004 about like an actual dude? Is any of this real, or is this just like completely made up? Is Dances with Wolves about like an actual dude, and how like true to form was it? Because like I'm not gonna sit there and say that the idea just has never happened in history. I just don't remember learning anything about it. But at the same time, something along these lines clearly has to have happened at different points in time, because they use it in the first movie, right? The phrase going native exists. This is like, clearly this phenomenon has to have occurred with these occupying powers. And so is there any validity into featuring that story? And I would tend to think, yeah, because like that's like, I think the only ethical way you can show white characters within the stories like this at this point, in any kind of heroic light, or any kind of non-morally gray light. So like, that does maybe say something, that those stories, at least for a time, certainly in the 90s, really resonated with people. And it's caused its own breed of problems, and the infantilization of native peoples.
Yeah.
I was watching a Milo Rossi video today, and he was talking about the way that natives of any population get portrayed is either of the brutal savage or the tragically doomed, impotent, spiritual guide. Seems to be like this box that native peoples are put into when films and narratives decide to tell a part of their stories, because of course their stories are more complex. And so it's just it just creates this really weird box to put people in, and I cannot deny that it makes people feel incredibly uncomfortable. And when South Park came out after Avatar 1, and it's like, it's just Dances with Smurfs, that was like a huge meme for a long time. And I I think you're onto something that I'm not sure if James Cameron really necessarily beats those allegations, but fuck, man, there's an Australian dude killing whales now too. So,
Well, and
um,
to your white savior point too, I think the other big thing that Avatar is really guilty of in all three movies is sort of the largest crime about these white savior narratives is when you do that, when you position a white character as coming into the indigenous side and trying to save them, quote unquote, what you're actually doing is just telling a different kind of colonization story. What you're doing is
mhm,
you're saying that the white people's colonization is being resisted, but it can only be resisted by validating the methods of the white person and using them against them. And Avatar, all three movies, but especially the third one, I think less so with the second one. The second one, I think, has the least of a lot of these problems, but the first one and the third one, especially, you can't validate that Pandora and its culture and its people, insofar as they are real, because they're not, are worth saving if your method of saving them is that they just become the white people with guns.
mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was my thing with Way of Water specifically, and like when I was watching these movies, is I was watching them just because, like we said, our friend in the server, Muzi, I wanted to give him a shot for him, and I wanted to just expand like my view on films and stuff. So I watched the first one, and it was a little bit uncomfortable, but like I kept hearing Way of Water's better, Way of Water's better, just get to Way of Water. And I got to Way of Water, and it certainly was better. I had a much better experience with that. I liked that movie, and I was going to see Fire and Ash in the theaters. I was excited for it, and I didn't have the worst time in the world. But a lot of those issues, which you said, Steve, that I had in the first movie, came back in that one, and it took a lot more of my generous readings to what James Cameron was doing, and kind of like brought them back down to my original opinion. I'm still not as harsh on it as I were, because I do think, like I said, the heart is in the right place. I don't think you're not allowed to like these movies or not allowed to go to Disney World. Like, I think all of that's perfectly fine. There's far more things that I for God's sake, I've got a Doctor Doom profile picture on, and that's not exactly the most glowing representation of a culture. So like I completely understand when people talk about that. But I feel it is something that the franchise just doesn't want to let go, despite being given countless opportunities to move away from that narrative to more interesting ones. And it feels like we just have to keep doubling down on what feels like James Cameron kind of living out his fantasy of what he wished would happen in his life through Jake Sully and Spider, where he's accepted into this magical world and gets to live out his ultimate fantasy of being one with nature, which again isn't necessarily. It's like telling a kid who wants to cosplay T'Challa that, hey, you can't wear the Black Panther costume, maybe keep the mask on. Like it's like you feel like an asshole for doing it, but it's also like, dude, you need to really kind of be more aware of what you're doing here.
And that's why I feel like there is more uh, of a more nuanced reading of the movie, and why Jake's a good character, because I think when you externalize and talk about all of these problems, I think that there is something in the text that tries to address them. And the thing in the text that addresses them is the fact that Jake Sully's a shitty dad, and his kids are growing up perpetuating his mistakes, and by doing that, he's further alienating himself from the thing that he claims to love. If the bad intentions of Avatar are that it uses cultural appropriation to tell a white savior story, then Jake Sully is the white savior who keeps trying to save people, that the movie is constantly telling us he's bad at it, that he's failing at this, that there is always going to be an inherent contradiction between him wanting to save them and him turning them into the very thing he is trying to save them from. And again, I think Fire and Ash kind of shits the bed on this a little bit by the end. But I do think that's there. And I think whether or not Cameron intends it, the movie does have a sort of a more specific perspective on the things that it's appropriating, because it's all filtered through in narration Jake Sully's perspective. This whole thing is an amalgamation and a fever dream of a white guy that fell in love with something different. And if Cameron's ultimate sin is that he's got unlimited time and money to create the wildest things in his imagination, and his imagination is limited to cultural stereotypes but blue. And if you think that that's just straight up the thing about these movies that's unappealing, then I think Jake's a great foil for that, because that's exactly his deal.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also worth mentioning that, like, the thing that originally inspired Cameron to do this in the first place from Jump was the movie Pocahontas, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was like the introduction, or the thing that put the idea in his head, apparently. And so I think, that's a movie that's been talked about to death, of just how poor representation it is, and all the things that it gets wrong, and the things that it internalizes. But I mean, like, at least end of the day, in Pocahontas, she's the one that saves them from combat, from war and stuff. John Smith is like, he's the damsel in distress by the end of that movie. Whereas this does kind of repeat or fall into those tropes. I am a little worried. I haven't gotten around to Fire and Ash yet, but like, you can kind of say whatever about Jake Sully. It is maybe a little bit weird that like Sigourney Weaver is also playing the character that seems to be becoming the most in tune with the world of Pandora, that she's like fully immersing and like to the point where even the natives are like mocking her for being weird about becoming too spiritually connected to the like central consciousness of Pandora. And like, that's, I don't know, that's maybe where we begin to go like maybe a bridge too far, because there is like nuance and complexity to Jake Sully's character, but like Sigourney Weaver's playing her own daughter now. I had to look that up because I was pretty sure, but I wasn't 100%. So Sigourney Weaver's playing her own daughter now within this, and she's maybe Jesus.
She's straight up Jesus. Don't worry.
Okay.
That comes full circle. She
Good.
literally sees the face of God. Don't worry.
Okay. So like, look, I think the fucking, it's not great. And I do think that no matter what we do, we're gonna kind of always be moving around this narrative. But I also am like getting to the point where I'm beginning to think that like these conversations, while useful and I'm glad we're having, are maybe like more of a distraction and a problem in and of themselves. There was I watched a good essay on the idea of Hollywood makes movies that address like social ills and social changes in order to keep people complicit, because you get emotional resolution when you watch these issues be solved on film or in art, that you don't get from just living with them and demanding change. So I begin to think that, like, if you have a problem with this movie perpetuating this stereotype or doing a poor job of representing people, there might be some level of value in conversations around it, but ultimately I think the more useful thing should just be to like go out and find what you can actually do about this problem in the real world, as opposed to just discussing it endlessly on on the internet or even in person. Like, if you like the movie or not, or if you hate the movie, I feel like there's less value in that. It was interesting because, like I said, I went to the ride for Avatar. There were 2 rides. I did one of them with my mom. We had a 2-hour line. It was fun. And you get to like walk through the floating mountains and stuff, and that was really cool. And it's like a visual ride, and you get on the fucking banshees and you fly through, and they even like make it really immersive and stuff. It was a really good time. But like, we're sitting there having lunch together after the fact, and like, I'm looking around the because Disney does such a good job of this, of like trying to make you feel like you're really seeing the things from the movies, or you're a part of the world. And I'm looking around, there's like all this like beautiful textile work where, these wonderfully intricate pieces of woven scenery that are just hung up as like just for visual spice and decoration, and those are all beautiful things, but they're also like objectively pilfered from like all these different cultures throughout the world, that have been fucking colonized. And so like my mom and I are just having dinner, sitting there. She's talking about like, oh well, I wouldn't want Leah to watch it. It's too violent. I'm like, I wouldn't really consider it, because I hadn't seen Way of Water yet, but I wouldn't really consider Avatar, violent per se. It's got like, more what I would consider just like general action for a movie of that type. She's like, oh no, just the genocide and the atrocities. It just reminded me. It made me cry. It reminded me of what I read. I buried my heart at Wounded Knee Creek back in high school, and I'm like, I don't know how to really take that. The fact that like, is it a net positive that it's just putting these ideas back in people's heads, and it's kind of changing the cultural perception, because like before the 90s, when you did films with native people, they were still mostly cowboys and Indians, the brutal savages by and large. So what do you do with that? Is there value to this? Is there something that was gained, or is this just continually a net loss? And I don't really have the answers on that. It's just it's in my head, and it's something I was really thinking about a lot. Alfie, you'd say you know the answers.
Yeah, again, I just click back to, I feel like all that needs to be said, because I agree with you, Ian. I think people waste too much time. Too many talented people, very smart people, waste a lot of time and energy on conversations that go nowhere to people that don't want to hear them. I think the most important thing is to have that conversation with yourself, have that conversation with friends, and be like, this is definitely a barrier to entry. This is definitely something just to acknowledge. And you can take that how you like, and you'd be like, does this make me inform my reading of the piece, right? Like when I go and watch this movie and I have that in my head, does it add to Quaritch's character? Does it make his horrors feel more uh interesting when he goes on his character arc in Fire Ash? Especially, it adds a lot to me for that. Does it detract from scenes with Spider where it's screen time I would rather spend with other characters? For me, yes. For other people, maybe
See,
not.
I like Spider quite a bit. I don't know.
So that's what I mean, right? Is like, it's, for me, I struggle to even get into his character just purely off the visual. Is It's distracting for me, right? I wish you made a different choice there visually, but I recognize that's just like a personal hang-up I'm having with this. It's not something that's objectively true about the movie. Just, I feel like as long as we can sit down and talk about it and be like, hey, yeah, this is a thing that exists, and we can have different opinions on it, I'm fine with it. Why I struggle is when people, if you bring it up when they like something and they get really dismissive and like, oh well, it doesn't even exist, or it's not a problem, or they get way too interested and accepted where we're talking about something completely different. It's like, well, I'd rather talk to you about indigenous people than about the fucking Avatar movie at that point, because you've got more to say about that because it's more interesting. So I feel like there's just accepting what it is, acknowledging it, and then moving on and talking about it in context of the piece is all you ever really need to do, in my opinion.
That's fair.
And just to kind of,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just to kind of build off of that, there was a movie that came out a couple years ago called American Fiction, and it was nominated for a lot of awards. It was a pretty big release. It's an okay movie, but I always really liked the opening scene because in it, Jeffrey Wright, who is a black actor, plays a literature professor, and in the opening scene, he's in a class with a bunch of college kids, and he's got on the board, he's got a Flannery O'Connor essay that has the N word in the title. And he's like, so who has some thoughts on the reading? And then a kid raises their hand and they're like, I disagree with the use of the word on the board and I don't want to read the book. And he's like, okay, that's great. Does anyone have thoughts on the reading? And then they just keep posturing that. And at some point, he has this really great line because he's literally just a big black dude. And he's like, if I got over it, you can get over it and do the reading. And that always kind of stuck with me because I feel like a lot of times what happens in these conversations is the moral platitude of racism is bad and wrong takes over from having any sort of like critical conversation about the racism in question inside of a piece that might be a worthwhile conversation to have, even if the result of the conversation is you don't like the thing anymore. I feel like in a lot of cases people just sort of like deploy that as a device to not have the conversation instead of having the conversation to arrive at that conclusion. And that's the thing with Avatar that I think that's more than anything what people should try to do, where it's not just let's look at let's just look at the movie and say cultural appropriation. I really do think there has to be some room for like, if you're going to make that claim, if you're going to have that problem, then I think we need to talk about it. And I think we need to talk about it in the context of the movie. We need to talk about it how it's used. We need to talk about it as part of the text, because that's what criticism is. Criticism is engaging with the text. It doesn't mean upholding the ideology that spawned the text. It means critically reflecting on the thing that's happening in the work. And I feel like with a lot of stuff lately, but Avatar definitely as a vehicle for this, people just kind of ride the sort of like performative moral wokeness
Yeah.
where they
And,
just
you know,
want
that's
to
probably
say dismiss it as like someone can just say they like Avatar and immediately get quote tweeted by 600 people of like, yeah, minus the racism or something like that. But no one wants to just sit and be like, let's actually talk about Jake Sully's character. Let's sit here and talk about what Cameron's vision of Native people are. Let's talk about what kinds of tropes is it borrowing from specifically, and how or is it reinforcing certain stereotypes and not others? What's the inspiration for those things? Because I think that's kind of where the power in the conversation is, right? Like, if you want people to not be racist, if you want people to like not make generalized assumptions, to have a critical perspective on white saviors, then what you got to do is you got to talk about them. You have to talk about what's the element here, what are the specifics that are driving this. And once you get to those specifics, it's easier both to avoid and to see in other places when they're being snuck in the back door.
Yeah. So there's something I wanted to talk about with this, because I feel like this is a good time to go back a little bit more to the film itself and talk about the character of Spider, who, like Alfie was talking about, it made him like really, really uncomfortable. And so I just did a quick bit of research. Rare for me, so pay attention. I'm usually just talking about whatever the fuck I want to say, and then if I'm wrong, I go, "Oh, okay, sorry about that." But like, so, there's a video posted by PBS Origins. It was called "Who Can Identify as Native American." I thought it was a really interesting take, because something that was, or still is, but was like much more prevalent for years and years, especially after like I guess you might call it like the native explosion after the 90s, is people identifying themselves as, oh, well, I'm part native and stuff. And like I personally fell into this, and because I'd been told that growing up, but I hadn't really like realized the requirements that the tribes themselves put on this stuff, which is why I kind of dropped it. I still have native ancestry, but I've tried not to make as big a deal out of it, because that's not something that they particularly care to hear. And so the thing that came up with this that reminded me of Spider is there's a woman named Buffy St. Marie, who's an American singer-songwriter, and like you Google this woman, you look at pictures of her, she like looks, not just looks native, looks very stereotypically Native American, right? She's given speeches, she's accepted awards, and very importantly, she is a member, like certified member of a tribe. But the thing is, she has no actual native ancestry that anyone can like really point to, and very importantly, nor has she ever claimed to have. Something that's like, I think, really particular about what might make someone so uncomfortable to look at Spider, is the fact that like we are still dealing with, end of the day, this really visceral reaction to the idea of like in the back in the day it would have been called degrading of the race, but now I'm not sure what else to call it that doesn't, inherently make the more native peoples sound inferior. I'm not sure what the language would be used there, aside from just appropriation. But like this was a thing that like people were worried about. This was like, to an extent, the idea of Tarzan, because I've read that book, and let me tell you, you want to talk about books that make you feel comfortable.
Jesus.
Fucking Tarzan is terrible.
Tarzan is rough.
Yeah. Phil Collins really works some magic for the Disney movie that time, let me tell you.
That is probably not
like,
when you want an audiobook out loud either.
Oh no, that's the thing, is I did audiobook it too way back like years ago now. And I just felt bad for the narrator because he was doing a LibriVox, which like LibriVox, if you don't know, is like this free website where you do audiobooks or readings of like famous works of literature that are in the public domain to create public domain audiobooks of them for people. And from what I've come to understand, a lot of the authors, or a lot of the narrators, they sound really young because it's mostly like becoming like a requirement for certain like college classes that you have to do a LibriVox recording. Like that's becoming a regular assignment, from what I've come to understand. So like, feel bad for the student that had to do that one. Anyway. But like it's just very interesting because the idea of, oh well, you're not really from that culture, you can't embrace it, that is a relatively inherently imperialist idea that didn't necessarily exist within these other cultures, and that's like a broad statement. There are exceptions on both sides. There are ones that just absolutely you could never join. There's ones that like joining was easier than others. It was a plethora. No, these people were not a monolith, and these people, and we're not even talking about just Native American culture. We're talking about like cultures from all over the world. It would not actually be that strange to have something like this. Steve, you and I did a review a couple years ago now, but it was on Daniel Day-Lewis.
The Michael Mann movie, right?
Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah, it is, but it's also like uncomfortable in some way because you got Daniel Day-Lewis being a very white actor, and he's running around being like the greatest Native American of all time. But
right.
Like that's a fundamental part of his character is, yeah, he's biologically he is British or whatever, but he was abandoned as a child and adopted by this native tribe. And so that's just like, for these other cultures, they don't necessarily see race in the same way, and so it's actually more conceivable for like a character like Spider to kind of exist in a very real world sense. And I think the fact that it causes some uncomfortableness, I think, is more telling of being locked into a very westernized imperial legacy idea of race than it necessarily is about like just coming from a place of respect for these other cultures.
Well, and like too, within the context of the movie and Spider's character, everyone in the movie sees him as one of them. Everyone treats him as if that he is also just an Ivy. He's got the tattoos, he's got the hair, he plays with his friends like they're his own family and his own siblings, and he doesn't identify. Except Natiri, yeah. Except Natiri's racist ass. No, I'm kidding. But everyone is welcoming of Spider as part of the family, and it really, if you really want to get down to brass tacks about this, Spider is more a Na'vi than Jake is in practice. And that's part of that sort of uncomfortable tension with him, where I feel like within the context of the movie, if Spider's presence is he is the person that was accepted by these people versus the other people are just imposing themselves on the planet, that does kind of qualify as a sort of meaningful difference. It is one of those things where it's like when you think about easily identifiable characteristics of fashion in real life, and a black person might wear a specific kind of outfit that we think stereotypically, and then a white person wears it too, right? Like, is that the white person appropriating the black person's appearance, or is there a certain kind of racialization that we're doing in having that jump to begin with that probably bears some kind of interrogation? And certainly there are definitely a lot of cases of like blackface and dreads on white people that like we do kind of need to talk about and be like, what exactly about your identity are you expressing by doing these things? But when we start having this sort of more essentialist idea of race, where like just can't practice things that other races do because that's appropriation, well then that's kind of sticky, right? Like that's like, is a white person who does martial arts appropriating some kind of Asian lineage? Like I don't think so. That seems like a ridiculous argument to make, in my opinion. But like the things about it, like to get back to with Spider, like there are things historically that we have done as racist caricatures that are bad, but within the context of someone doing a practice that is seen as racialized, are we assuming the racialization, or is there something malicious actually happening there? And with Spider, I don't think there is. I think with Spider, the idea is that the idea that you can accept him as one of the Na'vi is the whole point of his story, as weird as it feels.
I think that's fair.
And
I
again,
actually quite
part
like
of it
Spider
feeling
as a
weird is
character.
the point. Same.
Yeah, no. I quite like Spider as a character. I thought he was really effective here. Particularly, like, not his final scene, but that moment underwater looking at his dad was just... And then there's just, like, complexity within that. Like, he's kind of living vicariously through his dad through that movie, too, where he's just, like, this is what he wishes he could be doing. He wants to be an Avatar so badly. Or an Avi just straight up so badly, but he can't. So like getting to see his dad do it is like he's getting to see his dad live his dream. I thought that was all really interesting stuff. There's Alfie just told me he's got to get going soon, but there's one major like element of this that we haven't talked about so far, and I do want to make sure we cover it because James Cameron very famously loves the ocean. So him doing like recreating whaling, like that was the thing for me where we watched the whole scene of them killing the fucking whale, and I was like, man, this is hard to watch. Weren't they on this planet for some fucking like metal? What's the purpose of this? Why did they go recreate whaling? And the answer you get throughout it, I was like, oh, okay. It's very interesting because, you know, before crude oil became a thing, whale oil for lamps was this huge, massive industry, and like also for machines, was this huge, massive industry. So it's very appropriate, and just making it so incredibly wasteful. They just do all of this, kill the fucking thing, just to take a tiny vial out of its fucking brain. Just so blatantly cruel and awful, and I think just does a good job of showing why whaling was so fucked up if anyone in the modern day and age didn't agree. But I really liked Spider's moment in all of that. That's all you're taking. It's just so fucking terrible.
I'm glad you brought that up because MVP of the movie, who isn't Kotrich, is the big whale Payakan. Fucking love Payakan. He's so cool.
Firecon doesn't fucking play around. Firecon's all about business. I love that. He's
Right.
Payakar's the fucking dark woke of the movie. Where he just fucking, you know what? You know how we stalled colonization? We just throw ourselves on the ship and squish them.
It's awesome. Payakan's so cool, dude. But I'm
Payakon
glad
said the revolution will not be televised. um,
No, dude, legitimately, you gotta see the third one because the big thing about the whale analogs in this movie, the Tolkien, their big thing is like they bond with the water people and that they're pacifists by nature and they go together in big families. And Payakan's different because he's exiled from his family, but the reason he's exiled is because he killed the people that killed his mother. And the whales have this big no-no of like, no, you don't do that. And then even the fisherman guy is like, yeah, they never fight back. They just don't do anything. They just let us kill them, basically. And in the third movie, there is a council of ancient whales that you get to meet who have a conversation about this, and it's awesome.
that's so fucking good.
There's just a council of giant ass whales. It's so cool.
When they're sitting there fucking like taking apart the braid, he's like, "Yep, nope. They're intelligent. They have conversations. They have a language. They compose music. They are probably smarter than us. Then how come we? This is like the most Australian man of the world. Then how come I can fucking harpoon him?" It just comes out of nowhere. I fucking love it so much. The fact that they didn't forget to make sure to acknowledge that Australia also horrific colonizers. Great, no notes.
I love the bit towards the end where, or right before the final battle, where they find the body of the whale that they just killed, and the wife of the tribal leader for the water people. It's the one that she bonded with, and she's crying over it, and she's talking about like how she just had a son and she was trying for years to have a son. Like it's kind of gut wrenching to watch. You really start to feel for these people in that moment.
Yeah, that seems great. I really like her character as well. She's one of the standouts for me. The whole water tribe on the whole, I think is really interesting, and I love their designs and how they're both, but like her performance during that whole thing where she's just kind of having like a cat off with Natiri, and her husband and Jake just kind of look at each other. Like if you've been married, like you Ian will probably have had this experience at some point in his life where like you just kind of have to let the wife hiss it out, and you're just looking at the other guy in the room. "Hey, you seeing this? Yeah, I'm just staying out." It was one of the most, it was the most relatable. The only times I understood Jake Sully was that moment. But I was like, yeah.
I did like where he shows up. He's like, I wasn't worried about the chief. I was worried about
so good. Yeah, Natiri just hated her guts. Natiri just being like hateful for 2 movies in a row. I fucking love. It's so much fun.
Yeah. You need to get off Natiri's ass a little bit, Steve. You're on this Jake Sully agenda. You're against Natiri. I see what you're putting down.
I love Natiri. I'm just saying that she's kind of hateful when it's all.
I'm saying she was right, and they should have slit his throat.
Natiri did nothing wrong.
I'm not saying that she was wrong. I'm just saying she's hateful.
Yeah,
that's her whole thing.
I love to go Payakard. We don't give a fuck about civilian casualties. We go to war. We take them down.
Payakard's so good, dude. Best character. Best character.
Yeah. That guy's cool. No, I really did like that whole sequence, and again, just James Cameron, the water guy. Like, remember when Grant Morrison was like, "Oh, I can't do comics because my first big comic, I put myself in it. Now I became the fourth wall breaking guy." James Cameron's like, "Yeah, every movie's gonna have just gallons of water everywhere." And I just love him for it.
It's kind of wild. Like, he became this deep sea diving expert in the 90s, and he makes Titanic, and it's gotten to the point now where decades later he's legitimately a deep sea diving expert. Like, people go to him to ask for advice how to do things.
I mean, he's nuts. Like one of the, like, what's the statistic? Like, more people have been to the moon than have been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and James Cameron is one of the people that has been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
Yeah.
It's just kind of wild to think about. And he like made a film of it and everything, special design to sub. Good for him. Good for James Cameron. You do you, James. I don't know. The only other thought I had is talking about the Water Tribe, and we're talking about the whaling scene. What the fuck happened to the Water Tribe, like, after that initial attack? Because you see the, like, chief and his wife start, like, you know, doing some cool-ass takedowns and stuff, and then, like, everyone else just leaves. I thought that was, like, the weirdest, maybe I just missed the beat or something, but that was, like, the weirdest plot element to me, is, like, I don't recall the scene where they just fuck off and leave Jake Sully's son to get killed. And then, like, it's especially because like the chief's daughter is still with them the whole time, but like the whole ass Water Tribe, they rode out to battle and they fought for like 2 minutes and it just like left. Did I miss something?
So two things on that note. You didn't miss anything, but there is a good 10-20 minutes of stuff that's cut from this because Cameron didn't want to have the ending have too much excessive action of just random people fighting each other. But the other thing is part 3 or Fire and Ash, it takes place literally right after this. The thing that's hard to sort of conceptualize with the end of this movie is Stephen Lang's character, he only brought one ship. It was just one ship and a couple helicopters and a bunch of boaters. So like all of that shit's dealt with pretty quickly, and at that point it just becomes about Sully and Quattrus' relationship. But then when you get to Fire and Ash, it's literally the aftermath of the battle. So all the water people in Sully, they're deep sea diving to recover weapons from the ship. They're preparing for a counterattack. They're assessing their casualties. Like the end of this battle continues on into the next movie.
Okay, fair enough. I just thought that was like a weird thing that stood out. Okay. I wonder, has Cameron like made any plans to release those 10 minutes? Is there like deleted scenes of it, or no because of budget?
I got to imagine they're on the DVD, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think they are. I think he's kind of waiting until more is done before he releases stuff, because there's like ideas he wants. Like I think some of the stuff he deleted in this one, he repurposed, because this and 3 were actually one script originally. And then it got
just let James Cameron release a 6-hour movie. Do it, you cowards!
Like, there are a lot of overlaps between the final battles between this one and the third one, and I'm sure like he's probably being conscious, like, I don't know for 100% if I'm gonna get to do the 4 and 5. I'm just gonna hedge my bets, and then when I get full confirmation, then I'll start releasing more shit. But at the moment, the only on the Blu-rays and DVDs isn't scenes, there's like behind the scenes, and there's like mocap versions of scenes, and there's like a couple of like stuff from the first movie, but there's not really that huge sequences that got deleted.
I mean, I don't think with something like this you could really do like deleted scenes the same way, because it would just look so terrible, because you'd have to do, you know, just your basic like in-camera render would probably be the best version of what you could get. I remember when Green Lantern came out on Blu-ray, they made a big deal about, like, with extra time added into the movie, and then they had the deleted scenes that they didn't add back in because they would have had to finish the visual effects on them. And they knew they were never going to make money on it, so they just look horrendously unfinished, to the point where they probably shouldn't have even released them. But here we are. It's also sad because it's a really good conversation between Hal and Sinestro in that scene, in those deleted scenes too. But it's so hard to be immersed in on any level. Yeah, I don't know. Like I quite liked this though. I had a really good time with this overall. I just thought it was you know, it's got baggage certainly, but you know, at least it's not afraid of its baggage, I would say. And I think that's kind of cool. It's not pussyfooting around its baggage. He didn't feel the need to like go out of his way to have like a Native American character there to be like, no, the Na'vi are fine or something. Like some fucking MCU ass shit.
They remind me of my own struggles back home. Like just like
Yeah.
Navi just start portaling in like as they've been in hiding this whole time.
Jake Sally's dad turns up and he's like fully indigenous. He's like, I'm so proud of you for finally accepting.
That's your secret, Jake. You've always been a Navi.
Yeah, he's like, oh.
Yeah.
Jake Skywalker.
Exactly. That's the movie. That's the anti-ass movie right now.
Alright.
Oh man.
Well, I promised Alfie we'd stop at 10, so we gotta stop. Oh no, now they know what time to record. Fuck! Anyway,
no.
so we gotta stop. We gotta call it there. We'll do ratings real quick. I'll give this movie, I'll go pretty high with this. I'll give this movie, 4 out of 5 crab submarine robots. Because those are fucking cool.
No, I'm right there with you. I'm gonna give this one out of 5 militant leftist whales.
Yeah. You stole where I was gonna go with it. I'm gonna give this one 3 out of 5 because I did enjoy it and I do think it's a spectacle and I do think it is definitely worth seeing. I'm glad this movie exists in this period of the blockbuster losing more and more of its specialness. This feels like a true blockbuster, which you don't get much of those anymore, so I do appreciate on that level a lot. I'm gonna give this 3 out of 5 sunglasses wearing soldier Navis that would have a rest in peace Charlie Kirk shirt on.
Blue Team 6, let's go.
Let's go, Blue Team 6. Lock in.
I know what the group
Tom
Halloween
Clancy's
costume's
Blue
gonna be
Team
this year,
6.
guys.
Exactly. That's the collab we need.
Yeah.
Call of Duty's Black Ops 10 Pandora War.
I'd play the shit out of that, dude.
that would be like a classic fucking game.
That'd be so much fun. Are you kidding? Can I fly on those things and shoot guns too? That sounds awesome.
Afghanistan was the beginning. Now we go to space.
Alrighty. Oh my goodness. Okay. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the philosopher.
And I am the champion of the oppressed.
Oh,
I'm the
okay.
Luddite.
And we are Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things. So, Champion of the Oppressed watched the Avatar movies and liked him, huh? Huh?
Cancelled.
Final act reveal we were waiting for.